Welcome to our presentation entitled Influential Theorist, Contemporary Education, a requirement of the course Curriculum 7009 at the University of Louisiana, Monroe. This presentation was developed as a collaborative effort between Rebecca Blount, Connor Franklin, Angela Foster, and Crystal Mallett, students of ULM's Curriculum and Instruction doctoral program. There were many great contributors who were instrumental in shaping the contemporary understanding of curriculum in these United States. Our objective through this presentation is to introduce our fellow scholars of the University of Louisiana at Monroe's Curriculum and Instruction doctoral program to two of the most influential individuals. We will discuss the life and times of Wherret Wallace Charters and John Dewey. In addition, we will discuss how these theorists respond to the four central curriculum questions that are the basis of this course, Curriculum 7009. Wherret Wallace Charters lived from 1875 until 1952, and his curriculum ideas are tied to the idea of efficiency. His career began in Canada, but the majority of his professional accomplishments come from his work in the United States, including 7 universities where he worked after earning 5 degrees. Charters was heavily influenced by John Dewey and the progressive and pragmatist schools of thought. Even though Dewey initially discouraged Charters from pursuing a doctoral degree, he eventually served as the major professor for his dissertation. Charters used progressive ideas like those of Dewey to attempt to define a functional theory of instruction. Charters believed that the function of school subject matter was, quote, to satisfy needs and solve problems, end quote, in society. From this thought process grew Charters' 7 rules governing curriculum construction. Those rules include: Number 1, identify the major educational aims by studying contemporary social circumstances. Number 2, classify the major aims into ideals and activities, reduce them to operational objectives. Number 3, prioritize the aims and objectives. Number 4, reprioritize the aims and objectives with a greater focus on relevance to children rather than adults. Number 5, identify the aims and objectives that are achievable at school. Other aims and objectives should be included in extracurricular pursuits. Number 6, identify materials and methods necessary to meet the selected aims and objectives. And number 7, order the proper materials and methods consistent with principles of child psychology. Charters was prolific both as a writer and as an editor. His first book was published in 1909 and focused on his belief in the functionality of education. Many of his later publications dealt with designing curriculum and training teachers based on his experience as a principal and university professor. In total, Charters published more than 500 books, chapters, and articles. Later in his career, Charters became a pioneer in the field of audiovisual education. He was one of the first to study the impact of motion pictures on children. He concluded that children tended to accept movies as factual, which made them both, quote, a potent medium for education, end quote, and a possible problem if the content were incorrect. His research prompted the use of video that continues in classrooms to this day. Charters' thoughts about curriculum were influenced by both the classical and religious aspects of traditional education and the scientific and practical ideas of the 18th century. He was a proponent of the democratic curriculum movement as defined by John Dewey, a movement that focused on, quote, sensitivity and skills students needed for successful living in a democratic and free environment, end quote. He did also hold that traditional content mattered and still had a place in classrooms. He said, "The most common concept in the educational discussions and literature of the last decade has been our changing civilization. Education has become change conscious. Economists and educators say that we are in the midst of one of the critical periods of sudden mutation when new patterns of social conduct come quickly into being. The tempo of this age is accelerated, a new ear is being born. While this is going on, however, our single-track professional minds must be balanced by stability. Changes are occurring, but in meeting the problems of change, we have mainly to rely upon the fundamental solutions that have been tested through the ages. We cannot evolve a wholly new set of fundamentals in one generation. Moral codes still hold in essence. Industry, honesty, unselfishness, and cooperation are as valid in 1932 as they have ever been. Our new situations do not call for new virtues so much as for the intelligent use and modification of ancient values." John Dewey, a founder of early American pragmatism, was born in 1859 in Vermont. He received a degree from the University of Vermont in education, but while teaching in Oil City, Pennsylvania, he studied philosophy with a former philosophy professor. This encouraged Dewey to attend Johns Hopkins University and attain a PhD in philosophy. He published around 40 books and 700 articles in his lifetime. He died at 92 on June 1st, 1952. Dewey was influenced by the conflict between neo-Hegelian idealism, Darwinian theory, and Wundtian experimental psychology. His philosophy was meant to bridge this conflict. It left him wondering if life was simply biological and functional, or if it was creative and spiritual. Dewey's main contributions were revolutionary in a world where the classics were learned by rote, subjects were separated from each other, teachers were viewed as masters, and learning was a passive activity. Some of the key writings by Dewey on education, and there are many, are listed here. John Dewey's key writings include The School and Society, Democracy and Education, Experience and Education, and The Pedagogic Creed. Dewey believed that curriculum theory should be driven by psychology and sociology to influence the whole child. He also believed that it should be based on real-life experiences. It should be implemented in a way to promote how to think rather than what to think, and evaluation of the curriculum was based on observing a student attempt to solve a problem and try to predict future actions. Things that Dewey was noted for are as follows: meaningful activity, interdisciplinary learning, problem solving and scientific inquiry, classroom democracy, and group activities and movement about the classroom. Now to hear from our two distinguished theorists. These gentlemen will assist us with understanding their views on the 4 curriculum questions that lead our studies of curriculum foundations, principles, and issues. There was a time when W.W. Charters looked to John Dewey for guidance, but their views on education took different directions. Let's take a gallery walk through their thoughts. Charters saw curriculum as the means to an end. He believed that, quote, form follows function, end quote, and that curriculum should be derived from the knowledge, understanding, skills, and concepts that students were expected to master. On the other hand, John Dewey followed a movement that focused on the, quote, sensitivity and skills students needed for successful living in a democratic and free environment, end quote. He believes to truly educate is to cultivate a social consciousness. Charters and his contemporaries, quote, believed that empirical examination and inquiry into life and job situations would reveal the basis for curriculum content, end quote. Educators must perform a functional analysis and a structural analysis to determine what and how to teach. John Dewey viewed knowledge selection from skills and subjects needed to promote democracy and evolved from real life experience. John Dewey felt that teachers were to provide students with opportunities for scientific inquiry and problem solving based on prior experiences and student interest. In this light, teachers are meant to be a guide, so curriculum is something that is based on a mutual teacher-student decision. Charters believed that any teaching methods could be acceptable as long as it, quote, was faithful to the function, end quote, of why that subject matter was included in the curriculum. Charters said, quote, the functional role of teaching was to assist pupils to appreciate and control the values of life. This means that the school seeks to help pupils to do what they want to do, but in addition, the school is expected to teach them to appreciate what is worth doing, end quote. While Charters believed in the importance of student choice in curriculum, he fully embraced the idea that teachers must present curriculum that is best for students, regardless of their individual likes and dislikes. The predetermined functionality of subject matter must be sacrosanct. According to Dewey, students are problem solvers in pragmatism, and they are intimately tied into the learning process because it is driven from their interest and experiences. This suggests teachers should organize learning in all sorts of groups as well as individually, provide for a variety of learning styles, use an interdisciplinary approach, and provide hands-on projects and many activities. Charters stood on curriculum being developed as the organization of objectives that address the needs of society. Consequently, he would expect the developed curriculum to be evaluated by verifying the student's attainment of organized objectives and prioritized content. John Dewey posits the purpose of curriculum evaluation is to make sure the student knows how to learn and has gained practical, meaningful skills. This is evaluated by observing a student while working on a project or seeing the student make connections. Curriculum evaluation is the responsibility of the teacher, but benefits the student and society. As we study the philosophies, theories, principles, and issues that mold the contemporary understanding of curriculum in these United States, we cannot ignore the need to find balance. Our two theorists each have made enduring contributions to the way in which we educate. It would be advantageous to the 21st century curriculist to glean from each of these theorists and find that needed balance. We contend that balance can be found in these truths. The purpose of the curriculum is to liberate an individual's consciousness of being so that the freedom of expression, creativity, and innovation would benefit society. Thence, the knowledge to be selected into the course of study should be determined by the individual who is seeking such liberation. The knowledge that would deliver the student into this state of liberation is the knowledge worth teaching and learning. Therefore, the relationship between the teacher and the knowledge selection process should include an understanding of the individual to be liberated. As the nature of students, their instincts and powers should direct the learning process, as opposed to the learning process guiding them into being the pre-prescribed contributors to society. Thus, teachers should organize the learning experiences and relationships according to the interests and power of the student. with an empirical observation of a self-actualized contributing participant of society, the developed curriculum can be evaluated to confirm the effectiveness of its selection and organization. If the desired results are not apparent, then it becomes the task of the teacher to reassess the dynamic individual nature of the student and redesign a more efficacious curriculum. It is the student, the learner, to whom the educational system and its practices are accountable. Find references on resources to further your studies and the exploration of W. Charters and John Dewey's lives and times, and their major contributions to the contemporary understanding of curriculum in the United States on this slide. Thank you for your attention throughout the presentation. We hope that the information shared has heightened your understanding and your eagerness to leave an indelible mark on curriculum design in the 21st century.